In the most important meeting room in the history of Maxwell and Company, the silence was so thick it seemed to crush the air. Eyes were fixed on the screen, until suddenly the screen went blank. The executives' hearts raced. This presentation would define the biggest contract of the decade with international clients. And in the midst of all that chaos, sitting discreetly in the corner was Emma Clark, the secretary who, for years, had been treated as invisible. No one could have imagined that, at that moment, she held within her the only key to avoiding the greatest corporate humiliation the company had ever faced. But the question hanging in the air was, would Emma dare to stand up, or would she let everyone fall? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss stories that will deeply touch your heart, and stay with me until the end, because what you're going to hear today could change the way you see the people around you. Emma Clark had worked at Maxwell and Company for 8 years, and her routine was marked by the silent monotony of someone who remained invisible even in the midst of a crowd. She always sat at the same table next to the door, where the constant movement of people coming and going seemed to obscure her presence. Her voice was rarely heard in meetings, and her name almost never appeared in acknowledgement emails or hallway conversations. To her colleagues, Emma was a familiar but forgotten face, the secretary who typed reports, organized schedules, and resolved pending issues without ever claiming credit. She knew every face, every habit, and every small weakness of others by heart, but few even knew her birthday or that she had dreams that extended far beyond the office. She did what was asked of her, not out of submission, but because she had learned that speaking loudly did not guarantee being heard, and that silence was often the only weapon she could use to survive in that environment. Time passed, and Emma became a kind of shadow at Maxwell and Company, a constant but nearly invisible presence, only noticed by most when they urgently needed something. No one questioned her competence, but no one included her in important decisions or conversations either. She learned to keep her thoughts to herself, observing from afar the petty power plays and alliances forming among executives. It was a world that seemed to have no room for someone like her, someone who spoke little but understood so much. Despite this, there was something about Emma that no one could see, an almost supernatural calm in the face of crises, a watchful eye that captured details others missed. It wasn't apathy, but a form of resilience that allowed her to remain steadfast and ready to act when others despaired. This ability, however, was locked away inside her like a well-kept secret, a wasted talent because she was never given the chance to showcase it. In the cutthroat environment of Maxwell and Company, where titles spoke louder than any hidden potential, Emma was simply part of the furniture, a supporting character in the play the executives were starring in. To them, her role was to be efficient and discreet, invisible and convenient. She silently watched the ego clashes, the meetings where decisions were made without her being consulted, and even sometimes felt the weight of silent contempt when an executive ignored her existence. Emma knew she couldn't change their perception of her, but she gathered strength for the moment when she could finally demonstrate her true worth. This waiting, though silent, was not passive. It was a daily exercise in resistance and self-knowledge. However, outside that office, Emma lived a different reality. In her small apartment, she spent hours studying technology, languages, and design, quietly investing in herself. She was fluent in Mandarin and possessed advanced technical knowledge that no one there imagined, because she never needed to show off and, above all, because no one had asked her. She was a woman who carried a library of unrecognized knowledge, an arsenal of skills that could one day become her weapon to earn the respect she had always been denied. On nights when the building was silent, she practiced speeches, perfected video presentations, and took online courses in simultaneous translation, without revealing it to anyone. The outside world didn't know, but Emma possessed all the tools to change the course of that company, if she were ever given the chance. The weight of invisibility was heavy, but it didn't stop her from preparing for when the right moment arrived. A moment that, for her, was closer than anyone imagined. On that fateful morning, the Maxwell and Company office buzzed with a nervous energy that could be felt in every hallway and room. The executives and managers, impeccably dressed and tense-faced, frantically reviewed their notes, adjusted their speeches, and made final phone calls, all immersed in the pressure of a moment that could define the company's future. The atmosphere was a mix of anxiety, expectation, and fear of failure. Emma, sitting in her usual position, observed everything with a watchful and discreet gaze, noticing every detail, every suppressed sigh, every glance exchanged between the leaders. She knew that for most there, her presence went unnoticed, as if she were part of the decor. As her fingers arranged glasses of French mineral water and checked the seating arrangements, her mind raced, anticipating what could go wrong. The 10 a.m. meeting with international investors was much more than a simple meeting. It was the chance to save the company from the crisis that was already threatening its financial foundations. It was a risky bet, a leap in the dark that everyone there hoped to take safely. Just before the start, Maxwell and Company CEO Robert Stevens appeared in the hallway like a storm about to explode. His face showed a mixture of anxiety, impatience, and wounded pride, as if the weight of that responsibility was crushing his spirit. Robert wasn't just a demanding leader. He was a man who saw weakness where there was no room for doubt and who looked down on anyone who wasn't at the top of the pyramid. He walked quickly, ordering in a firm, almost harsh voice, "Emma, have you confirmed the room is ready? I want everything perfect, especially the simultaneous translation. These investors don't tolerate slip-ups." Emma, carefully holding the coffee tray and water bottles, responded with the calm only those who have suffered invisibility know. "Everything is under control, sir." Inside, her heart was pounding, because she knew that any mistake would be immediately hers, and that she could not fail. She also knew that this would be another day where her value would be ignored, where her voice would be but a whisper in the office storm. But something about that day felt different, as if a spark was about to ignite a fire no one could put out. However, the unexpected began to unfold with the cruel precision of a tragedy script. A technical problem with the projection system threatened to halt the presentation, and as if that weren't enough to shake the team's confidence, the professional interpreter who had been hired to simultaneously translate the international executive speeches had to hastily cancel, citing a medical emergency. Silence fell over the room, as if the world had stopped for a moment to witness the collective despair. Robert flushed with anger and frustration, his eyes flashing with the rage of a leader watching his castle crumble. He muttered that this was an impending disaster, while the team members exchanged anxious glances, unsure of where to turn. Everyone, including Robert, turned their eyes to Emma, hoping she would, once again, be invisible, simply fulfill her role as a support worker and disappear from the scene. But inside her, something was growing like thunder about to break the sky. A quiet courage, a strength that had until then remained dormant. Emma knew that moment could be her last chance, the turning point everyone expected but no one saw. She was ready to show that the biggest flaw in that leadership wasn't the technical error, but the inability to see the potential and strength that had been there, right beside her all along. As the clock ticked relentlessly at Maxwell and Company, tension grew almost palpably, filling every corner of the office with a stifling atmosphere. Robert Stevens, the CEO, seemed ready to explode, pacing back and forth like a lion trapped in an invisible cage, his footsteps echoing like the beating of a war drum about to begin. His voice, once the absolute authority, now reflected a loss of control, his harsh, almost desperate orders only increasing the nervous atmosphere among the team. The executive's confidence, which hours before had seemed unshakable, now crumbled into expressions of fear and concern. On the other side of the door, the international investors, stern, silent figures, exchanged tense glances and apprehensive whispers, clearly displeased with the unfolding confusion. Every second that passed increased the risk of losing this billion-dollar contract that meant not only the survival of Maxwell and Company, but the consolidation of its future. Emma, watching closely, felt the weight of the moment on her shoulders, a deep mix of fear and unexpected determination burning within her. She knew that if nothing was done, this meeting would mark the end of a dream for many there, and perhaps for herself. The heavy silence was broken when Emma, with determined steps and a racing heart, approached Robert, who froze at the sight of her so firm and serene. "Can I help you, sir?" Her voice was calm, yet charged with a strength few had seen before, a stark contrast to her usual role as a silent shadow. Robert stared at her with surprise and disbelief, as if witnessing some kind of unexpected miracle. "You? Here? That's not your job?" she muttered dismissively, trying to maintain control, but her hesitation betrayed the fear of imminent failure. Emma, for her part, showed no fear. "I speak fluent Mandarin, sir, and I understand every detail of the presentation. I can translate for the investors until we find a definitive solution. I know exactly what they need to hear." The room became a field of almost palpable tension, where her every word seemed to defy years of invisibility and underestimation. The looks in the room shifted, some suspicious, others full of hope. There, at that decisive moment, the fate of that meeting and perhaps of Maxwell and Company depended on the courage of a woman who for years had been left behind, ignored and discredited, but who now assumed her leading role before everyone. With a slow, reluctant gesture, Robert finally beckoned Emma to take the lead in the meeting. She confidently took control of the projector and positioned herself at the front of the room, transforming the atmosphere with her silent yet powerful presence. Her clear, firm, and perfectly modulated voice masterfully navigated between English and Mandarin, translating each point with a technical precision that astonished even the most seasoned executives. Emma anticipated questions, explained complex details, and brought to light information that not even the leaders of Maxwell and Company had fully grasped. Her impeccable posture, communication skills, and in-depth knowledge renewed the energy in the room, which began to flow with a naturalness and professionalism that seemed impossible just minutes before. The investors' tense expressions gave way to smiles, nods of approval, and even discreet comments of admiration. That invisible secretary, who for years had been ignored and underestimated, became, right then and there, a key player in the company's success. Every word that came out of his mouth carried a silent weight and a powerful lesson. True value lies not in the position we hold, but in the courage to take control of our destiny when the world seems to want to silence us. As Emma led the meeting, the dynamic in the room changed completely, as if a new energy had been released into the previously tense environment. The international investors, who had initially displayed impatience and distrust, began asking detailed and specific questions, revealing a genuine interest in understanding every nuance of the proposal presented. Emma responded with an almost mesmerizing confidence, translating not only the technical terms but also capturing the tone and intention behind each sentence, explaining complex financial data with a clarity few in the company possessed. As she spoke, her eyes searched for support and reactions from those around her, observing a growing mix of surprise, respect, and admiration reflected on their faces. This wasn't just a translation. It was a powerful demonstration that, despite being invisible for so many years, Emma possessed not only profound knowledge but also patience, empathy, and the rare ability to lead when the moment called for it. Her every word connected the audience not only with the project but also with the woman who was quietly breaking down barriers, challenging long-held prejudices, and deconstructing the idea of what it meant to be just a secretary. The investors began exchanging approving smiles, discreet nods, and even compliments, making it clear that Emma had earned, in that moment, more than respect. She had earned genuine trust and admiration, an almost unthinkable feat for someone so many had ignored. Inside Maxwell and Company, news of what was happening in the room spread quickly, sweeping through hallways and offices like an unexpected wave of hope and change. Employees who had previously barely noticed Emma, the invisible secretary, now watched with a mixture of disbelief, surprise, and quiet pride. This woman who had long been seen as a supporting figure, a discreet shadow in the background of the company, was revealing a talent and intelligence that had been studiously ignored for years. Even managers who had previously treated her with disdain and arrogance began to give her different looks, some filled with shame for the past, others with genuine admiration for the present. Emma, who had been following everything closely, felt a wave of emotion rising within her, a whirlwind of feelings that mixed relief, recognition, and renewed hope. She knew that this moment not only saved the meeting and the crucial contract, but also represented a silent victory, a silent cry for all those who have been underestimated, marginalized, and made invisible in toxic professional environments. It was living, breathing proof that human potential is often hidden, just waiting for the right opportunity to blossom and illuminate the path of many. As Emma concluded her presentation with a perfect blend of technical mastery and empathy, one of the more experienced investors, a man with a face weathered by time and wisdom, slowly stood up and extended his hand with a genuine, emotional smile. "Thank you, Emma. Without you, this meeting would have been a disaster," he said in Mandarin with a direct, sincere look, recognizing not only her professionalism but also the courage and determination that had changed the course of that meeting. Emma smiled, finally feeling the recognition she had long desired. Not empty praise, but a true tribute to her value and quiet effort. Looking at Robert Stevens, she saw in his eyes a complex mix of surprise, admiration, and perhaps even a hint of regret, a silent acknowledgement that underestimating her had been the biggest mistake he could have made. From that moment on, something profound began to shift within Maxwell and Company. The invisibility that had enveloped Emma was being shattered with unstoppable force, and with her, the company began to realize that its greatest asset had always been right before its eyes, patiently waiting to be valued and recognized. The story of that morning would become not only a milestone for the company's future, but also a powerful lesson for everyone. True power lies in recognizing and giving voice to those the world insists on marginalizing, because they are often the ones who carry the strength needed to transform the impossible into reality. In that moment, Emma felt an overwhelming mix of emotions wash over her like a contained storm, difficult to contain. A profound relief at finally having her talent recognized after so many years of being invisible, a serene pride in her quiet perseverance, but also a painful sadness at the thought of the opportunities lost because of Robert Stevens's blind gaze and a leadership that didn't see beyond their title or role. She knew that this achievement wasn't just hers, but represented all those who dedicate effort, intelligence, and heart without receiving credit, remaining hidden in the shadows of the company. As she gathered up the presentation papers and turned off the projector, Emma felt the weight of Robert Stevens's gaze fixed on her. A look of surprise and embarrassment he would never express aloud, a mix of frustration and belated respect that spoke louder than words. In that moment, the power in the room shifted, no longer with the arrogant CEO, but with this woman who, despite so many obstacles, rose to save Maxwell and Company, proving that quiet talent is a company's greatest strength. As she left the meeting room, the corridor Emma walked through felt like a different universe, as if a veil had been lifted. The same hallway where she had hurried, silent, and invisible, now transformed into a space where the gazes and whispers of her colleagues followed her, full of surprise and veiled admiration. Those who had previously ignored or shown disdain could not disguise the new reality. Emma was visible, recognized. But even in the face of this change, she did not let pride overcome her. She remained polite, attentive, always ready to help, with the humility of those who know the value of their own effort but don't need to shout to be heard. Maxwell and Company was beginning to understand that its greatest asset lay not in positions or titles, but in the people who for years had remained on the sidelines, silently carrying the company on their shoulders. Emma became a symbol and hope for all the invisible, showing that when we finally look to those who remain in the shadows, we find the greatest potential to transform any story. Meanwhile, Robert Stevens remained in the room, sitting silently before the black projector screen, staring into space as if it were the reflection of his own mistakes. He felt, for the first time, the weight of the arrogance that had nearly cost him $1 million contract and, more than that, nearly destroyed the company's future. That uncomfortable silence was a sentence for his conscience, a painful invitation to self-reflection and the urgent need for change, not only for the team, but for himself as a leader. Outside, business as usual continued as if nothing had happened, but inside Maxwell and Company, something fundamental was beginning to be rebuilt. Emma, who had previously been a shadow within the company, now became the voice of those who had previously gone unheard. From that moment on, doors began to open not only for her, but for everyone who, like her, needed a chance to demonstrate their true value. And in that moment, as Robert remained lost in thought, the culture of Maxwell and Company began to change forever, guided by a simple and powerful lesson. Recognizing hidden talent can change everything. In the days following the meeting that would change everything, Emma felt the air in the office slowly transform, almost imperceptible to those not paying attention, but unmistakable to her. Those shy smiles and lingering glances from colleagues who had previously ignored her became frequent, and the small gestures of recognition grew steadily, like a gentle rain watering long dry land. People who previously wouldn't even share a good morning now discreetly approached her asking for help or advice, demonstrating a silent respect that Emma knew was only the beginning. However, the awareness that many still viewed her with disdain remained, and this gave her the strength to continue because she understood that true victory was not just being noticed, but building a solid space where her talent was consistently recognized, not by chance but by merit. Robert Stevens, meanwhile, continued his controlled isolation, an almost ghostly presence in the office, struggling with his own prejudices and the weight of arrogance that now seemed more of a burden than a shield. Emma knew her strength was not enough. The entire system needed to change. Maxwell and Company stood at a silent crossroads, where the decisions made there would forever influence the fate of many other invisible people, like herself. With Emma's gradual inclusion in previously restricted meetings, her voice began to echo where it had previously been a stifled whisper. Now, she not only translated complex documents but also contributed valuable insights, grounded not only in her impeccable fluency in Mandarin but also in her deep understanding of Maxwell and Company's strategies, which she had been closely observing for years. Every international presentation, every negotiation, was an opportunity for her to demonstrate how much her quiet dedication could make a difference. The reaction of foreign investors was surprising. Charmed by her professional demeanor and mastery of technical issues, they began to seek Emma out directly to clarify doubts, valuing her opinion more than that of many executives in official positions. She became a bridge between cultures, an essential link in expanding the company's business in the global market. This transformation was, for Emma, confirmation that true talent cannot be bought, cannot be imposed. It is born of hard work, patience, and the courage to keep going, even when no one believes in it. Each day, she absorbed and gave back generously, helping not only the company but also colleagues who, like her, felt they had not yet been seen. Meanwhile, Robert Stevens was experiencing an internal conflict that consumed his sleepless nights and his stony-faced mornings. The weight of his rigid and arrogant posture began to crumble in the face of the real impact Emma was having on the company. Acknowledging his mistake wasn't easy for him, a man accustomed to controlling every detail and believing that hierarchy was what guaranteed success. But the lesson came in the clearest form. No leadership is strong enough if it ignores the potential of the people who silently sustain it. Slowly, he began to make room for changes in his management style, realizing that valuing each employee was key to Maxwell and Company's survival and growth. Robert's journey was a lesson for all leaders who still insist on measuring people by titles, rather than by their true contribution. The company's transformation, which began with Emma's courage in stepping up, now extended to a more inclusive and open culture, where hidden talent was beginning to be celebrated. The road was still long, full of challenges, but that silent change already foreshadowed a different future. Fairer, more human, more real. As the weeks passed, Emma became a key player in the development of Maxwell and Company's international projects. Her desk, once isolated and forgotten in the reception area, was now a strategic point in the company, where the daily routine gained a new rhythm of purpose and recognition. Complex documents, detailed proposals, and technical reports passed through her firm and sure hands, and her opinion, previously silenced, was sought by managers and directors who previously barely noticed her. Emma never let pride get the better of her. On the contrary, she maintained humility, preferring to listen attentively and learn from each challenge, which made her even more indispensable and admired, even by those who were slow to accept her rise. Her fluency in Mandarin, a skill few knew, opened unexpected doors, facilitating delicate negotiations with Chinese partners who until then seemed inaccessible. Each meeting with these investors became a stage where her calm, knowledge, and empathy broke down cultural barriers and strengthened alliances. Emma began to realize that her invisibility had been replaced by a powerful presence, built not by luck, but by hard work, patience, and resilience. A true example for anyone who still feels underestimated and invisible. Her transformation was silent but powerful, like a flame slowly growing until it illuminates everything around it. Despite her visible achievements, Emma still faced an invisible burden. Internal doubts and the constant fear that, at any moment, everything could collapse and she would return to anonymity. Every meeting, every investor presentation, was a test of courage and competence, a moment when her past of invisibility clashed with her present of unexpected prominence. She knew that the respect she had earned thus far was fragile and needed to be sustained by consistent results and the building of solid relationships within Maxwell and Company. With each new project, she felt the still suspicious stares and silent resistance of colleagues who, motivated by fear or insecurity, saw her as a threat to the old order. However, Emma would not let herself be discouraged. She transformed these barriers into fuel to continue growing, always helping others who also seemed invisible, giving them a voice and guidance. The strength she carried came from the deep conviction that her value would never depend on immediate recognition, but on the consistency between her true ability and her daily actions. Silently, Emma became a voice no one could ignore. Meanwhile, Robert Stevens watched closely, sometimes silently, sometimes with restrained and almost imperceptible gestures, the evolution of the young woman who defied all expectations and redefined what it meant to be a discreet, efficient, and strategic leader at Maxwell and Company. He was beginning to understand that true leadership lies not in rigid control or maintaining the status quo, but in trust, delegation, and, above all, in listening before speaking, valuing what had previously been invisible. The arrogance that marked his early steps was slowly giving way to a more humble posture, even if he wouldn't admit it in words. Robert knew, silently, that without Emma, Maxwell and Company might have missed a unique opportunity to grow and strengthen in such a competitive market. Thus, even without openly declaring it, he began to set aside old prejudices and habits, opening the way for the company to adopt a different culture. One that recognized the hidden potential hidden between the lines of everyday life and in people who until recently had gone unnoticed. The future of Maxwell and Company was no longer solely in the hands of its CEO, but also in those who, like Emma, knew how to shine brightly even when no one was looking. The next morning, the Maxwell and Company offices awoke to a different, almost palpable energy that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. The corridors, previously so silent and indifferent to Emma's presence, now carried discreet whispers and curious glances that followed her every step. Emma arrived early, with her usual low-key manner, but something had changed in her demeanor. A delicate balance between humility and a quiet confidence that only those who have endured long internal battles could possess. She knew the next few days would be decisive not only for her career, but also for proving that true talent knows no limits imposed by titles or positions. Robert Stevens, sitting in his glass-enclosed office, watched the activity with a mixture of apprehension and tacit recognition, understanding that this young woman, whose fluency in Mandarin was unknown to many, could be the key to Maxwell and Company's future, especially at a time when the firm was seeking to expand its horizons in Asia. Meanwhile, the teams prepared for another round of international negotiations, where every detail mattered, and Emma quietly prepared to take on a central role that would change everything. As the clock ticked down, the meeting room began to fill with attentive executives, tense faces, and anxious hands clutching carefully revised documents. Robert, for his part, was present, but his rigid, controlling demeanor from the first meetings had given way to a more open and, one would imagine, even respectful observation. When the Chinese partners arrived, the initial tension that permeated the room gave way to a surprisingly lighter atmosphere, thanks to the immediate connection established by Emma, who not only mastered Mandarin but understood the cultural subtleties, pauses, and gestures that made all the difference in communication. She took the lead in translating and conducting the conversation with a naturalness that made these negotiations seem like her second home, a stage where her talent finally shone brightly. With each word, the investors' confidence grew, and the invisible barriers that existed began to melt like ice under the strong sun. Meanwhile, Robert, standing at the back of the room, watched with a mixed expression of surprise and a twinge of discomfort as he realized that the young secretary he had once ignored now carried on her back the hope of a future for the company. At the end of that intense day, when negotiations reached a promising agreement that could open Maxwell and Company's doors to the Asian market, Emma felt a profound mix of relief, accomplishment, and a quiet emotion she had rarely experienced. She knew this was not just a professional triumph, but living proof that true talent and dedication should never be underestimated, regardless of one's title, role, or position. The genuine respect from investors and colleagues was palpable, and even Robert, in his usual silence, made it clear with his gaze and posture that his view of leadership and potential was being definitively transformed. Emma walked the halls with firm steps, feeling the change in the air, aware that this moment was the beginning of a new story, not only for her, but for all those who were once invisible, underestimated, and silenced. The most profound lesson from that experience was simple and powerful. Never let anyone define your worth before you show the world the strength of what you are truly capable of. And, above all, that the power to transform a destiny is often hidden within the people no one expects. In the days following the decisive meeting, Emma's presence at Maxwell and Company became impossible to ignore, permeating like a fresh breeze in an environment previously stifled by routine and indifference. Her every small gesture began to take on greater significance. Her meticulous care in organizing files, the precision with which she handled international communications, and the way she conducted conversations in Mandarin with foreign partners, building bridges where previously there had been only distance. Robert Stevens, who until recently had seen Emma as an invisible secretary, began to see her in a new light, even if, at first, he resisted acknowledging the change. In meetings where he had previously ignored her presence, he now discreetly sought her opinion, intrigued by the clarity and depth of her analyses. Emma, aware that her achieved visibility was only the beginning, prepared herself for a trajectory that would require even more courage, patience, and skill, and, above all, the desire to demonstrate that her fluency in Mandarin was just one facet of a much greater talent. While rumors and comments about Emma's impeccable performance circulated through the company's corridors, her humble demeanor remained intact, surprising everyone who expected any trace of arrogance from her. Even in the face of the admiring smiles and sincere greetings she now received from colleagues who previously ignored her, she continued to offer help and share her knowledge patiently, never allowing her sudden fame to interfere with her character. Between meetings, documents, and endless hours of work, Emma took advantage of her free time to study, hone her skills, and increase her fluency in Mandarin, aware that the journey of learning never ends. Behind that apparent calm, there was intense internal pressure, the weight of carrying the hope of all those who, like her, lived years of invisibility. This responsibility, far from discouraging her, served as fuel to move forward, defying the limits the world insisted on imposing. Robert Stevens watched with a mixture of respect and discomfort, his mind unsettled by the quiet, constant force Emma represented. The arrogance and rigidity that had previously defined him began to give way to a deep reflection on his own prejudices and failures as a leader. He understood, albeit silently, that the success of Maxwell and Company would no longer depend solely on his decisions, but on the ability to recognize and value the hidden potential in the people he had underestimated for so long. This change was neither simple nor immediate. It required humility and courage to admit mistakes and transform the company's culture, which for years had rewarded titles and appearances over true talent. Meanwhile, Emma continued her journey, proving day after day that true strength lies in the combination of courage to persist, humility to learn, and the determination to be the voice of those who have not yet found a space to speak. The following week brought an unexpected invitation, which became a defining milestone in Emma's career at Maxwell and Company. Eduardo, Director of International Partnerships, called her into a private meeting, where the hushed atmosphere held an atmosphere of respect and expectation. With a serious but genuinely sincere look in his eyes, he extended his hand and said, "Emma, we want you to lead a new project for expansion in Asia. Your fluency in Mandarin and your deep knowledge of the company are essential for this challenge." The invitation wasn't just a formal promotion or superficial recognition. It was concrete validation of a talent that for years had been overlooked, underestimated, and kept in the background. Emma felt her heart race, not from fleeting vanity, but from the weight and significance of this unique opportunity that reflected her resilience and quiet dedication. She knew this was the moment she had silently fought for, the chance to finally use her skills to transform realities and break new ground. This call symbolized not only a personal victory, but hope for all those who, like her, live in the shadow of invisibility, waiting for a chance to show their true worth. On the day of the project kickoff meeting, Emma entered the room with a calm and profound confidence, dressed simply but carrying an unwavering determination and years of experience absorbed in silence. Colleagues who had previously passed her by without so much as a glance now greeted her with genuine respect and quiet curiosity, realizing that this reserved woman was now the center of attention. Robert Stevens, who had been closely following the presentation, couldn't hide his surprise when he realized that Emma was no longer the assistant he'd underestimated, but rather a natural leader, capable of bridging different cultures and transforming complex challenges into strategic solutions. With her impeccable fluency in Mandarin, she initiated the dialogue with the Asian partners, not only translating words but also conveying confidence, cultural understanding, and sensitivity to nuances that many overlooked. The meeting, which could have been just another corporate event, became a productive, promising conversation full of potential for international expansion. The foreign executives, impressed by Emma's naturalness and depth of knowledge, not only approved the project but also asked her to become a permanent part of the international expansion team. Her every word, gesture, and explanation opened new doors and broke down invisible barriers, transforming her image as an invisible secretary into an indispensable reference within the company. In the silence that fell after the meeting, Robert Stevens approached Emma with an expression that blended admiration and a previously unknown humility. For the first time, he looked her directly in the eyes, casting aside all the rigidity that characterized him, and said, "Emma, I've never told you this, but you've completely changed the way I see leadership, talent, and what truly matters in a team. Thank you for showing me what I didn't want to see before." She smiled, feeling that all the silent struggle, all the time spent invisibly, had finally found meaning and recognition. But Emma knew that the true victory lay not in receiving praise or a promotion, but in the unshakable certainty that her worth never depended on her position, but on the courage to persist, to keep learning, and to be true to herself, even when no one applauded. She understood that the world often judges by appearances, by the titles on doors, and by the noise someone makes, but true strength lies in those who remain honest, who dedicate themselves to listening and helping others to be seen and valued as well. What about you? Have you ever felt like your talent was invisible to someone who could change your life? If this story touched you, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel now to receive more heart-touching stories.